afternoon, everyone. I'm Valerie Wolf from OHCOW, and I want to welcome you to the third OC-COVID conversation. We're very excited today to have Dr. Roy McKay visit with us and share his knowledge and experience about respirator fit testing. The session is titled Why Respirators Seal and Fit Really Matter, and it's going to be hosted today by Krista Thompson, who's our occupational hygienist from the Southwest region. And I'm going to pass it over to her after I remind everyone to keep their microphones off and video off until the question and answer session at the end. But we do request, and Dr. McKay has even requested, that people type in questions in the chat during the session, and we may pause and answer those at that time. So questions in the chat, mics on, video off. Here's Krista. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just going to set the stage for fit testing. This will be a refresher for most of you. There may be a few people for whom this is new, so you're going to get a lot of great information on today, no matter where you are on the spectrum of knowing about respirator fit testing. So respirator fit test is a test checking if the respirator provides adequate protection. It can be quantitative or qualitative. I think Dr. McKay is going to get into quantitative mostly. I am a fan of quantitative whenever that is available. This is distinct from a respirator seal check. A respirator seal check, just as a reminder, that's every time you're donning your respirator, putting it on. That's when you do the check to make sure you have a seal, you don't have leaks. Typically, there's a positive and negative check. You probably do it and don't even think about it when you put it on. It's just become such ingrained habit. I will have these slides available. They're just a couple slides, and you'll have the websites. I know you can't see the bottom website because I'm in the way, but so I will make the slides available after as well, so you can find that link to the CCOHS, which has a great primer with more details. The qualitative fit testing, this is where we're using something detectable like Bitrex. With Bitrex, you get a bitter taste in your mouth. It's very subjective, because you're reliant on the person experiencing the taste and then telling you they experience the taste. Quantitative fit testing results in a fit factor, so a measurement made by an instrument of the challenge aerosol concentration divided by the aerosol concentration inside the respirator. So you're actually going to get a number for how much of a fit factor you are individually getting when you wear your respirator. It's very reassuring to have this number when you're in a high hazard environment. I will say that from experience. So today, Dr. McKay is going to be speaking mostly around the OSHA legislation. Many of you use CSA. Some of you are from organizations that are multinational and may actually have adopted the OSHA requirements. Whichever standard you use, you're using a really good standard. They're very similar. There are some differences. For example, the CSA standard doesn't have an allowance for quarter masks. Another difference, the CSA standard assigned protection factor for a full face piece is 100, whereas the OSHA standard for full face piece is 50. So there's these little differences, but whichever one you're using, as long as you're sticking within one standard and not cherry picking, you're going to have a good standard. Again, bringing this back to COVID. When you're wearing a respirator, for COVID protection, you're getting more protection than a mask because you can't perform a fit test on a medical or surgical mask. You can perform a fit test on a respirator. So you will get a known protection factor if you're wearing a fit tested respirator. An N95 half face respirator is going to give you an assigned protection factor of 10 when it's fit tested. So you are getting this reassurance that you're being protected and you're protecting others from you in case you are contagious and don't know it. So I'm just going to introduce Dr. McKay. Dr. McKay is an international speaker. Oh, I thought I had, there we go. An international speaker who is definitely well regarded in respiratory protection. He has more than 30 years experience with respiratory protection, pulmonary function testing evaluation, and airborne hazard assessments at the University of Cincinnati. In addition to his faculty appointment, Dr. McKay is a director of the Occupational Pulmonary Program at the Center for Occupational Health. Dr. McKay has taught respiratory protection and pulmonary function testing worldwide, including Japan, England, Germany, Australia, Belgium, Mexico, China, and Canada. I've actually taken a course from Dr. McKay in wonderful Winnipeg. I believe it was January, which is a great time to visit Manitoba. Dr. McKay has numerous prestigious appointments with responsibility for setting pulmonary function and respiratory protection standards worldwide. So we're so thankful that we were able to get Dr. McKay today. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Dr. McKay.
Okay, well, thank you. All right, Krista, can you see my slide?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, well, thank you for that introduction. Appreciate it, Val and Krista, very much. Thanks for the opportunity to give this presentation to your group here. And I'm going to be taking perhaps a different slant than what people may have commonly heard in other presentations on fit testing. So let me go ahead and I'm going to skip my background here. We don't need that. So let me tell you what I'm not going to present. This presentation is not going to explain why people fail respirator fit tests or even the purpose of fit testing. I think other presenters have covered these types of topics, and I want to take a different slant. And what I want to cover in this presentation is I want to answer the question, why do poorly fitting respirators pass respirator fit tests? And the answer to that, there's several different reasons why this occurs. Certainly human error is probably the most common, but then we also, whenever you have a fit test operator, we're dealing with human behavior. We have training issues with regards to the person who's doing the fit testing. Concerns regarding lack of supervision of that fit tester. And then sometimes the fit tester will make modifications to the testing equipment. And if nobody's there to follow up to see if this is being done correctly, now we end up in a situation where respirators that don't fit well will pass respirator fit tests. And this is just a partial listing. There's certainly many more. So these errors that can cause poorly fitting respirators to pass a fit test, they can be specific. They'll be specific to the type of method. So if you're using qualitative fit testing, such as sweetener Bitrex that Stephanie kind of mentioned briefly before, some of these things will be specific to that method. If you're using quantitative fit testing, some of these errors are specific to that method. And then we can group these methods into things that are going to be common to both. So the standards in North America, whether they be Canada or the United States, are very similar. That's a good thing. And in the US, we have OSHA, and it's up to the employer to provide employees with respirators that can pass an OSHA accepted fit test. So to begin with, I want to start off with something that I noticed in the AIHA Catalyst in the summer of 2021. And in this article, well, actually in this post rather, it said, quote, with respect to poor fitting filtering face piece respirators, one of our hospitals tested over 200 different brands and models of FFRs. They found only 8 that could be reliably used in their workforce. So that's addressing what I'm not going to be talking about. They're addressing poorly fitting respirators. But we can take away an important observation here. And that observation, or my comment here, is that this means that with respect to this quote, that more than 192 brands and models were unacceptable because they primarily had unreliable fit. Yet these same models are routinely being used elsewhere. So what does this tell us about the quality of the fit testing elsewhere? And that gets to my topic, which is why are poorly fitting respirators passing the fit test? So I know there's a big emphasis. I've been contacted by a representative of OSHA. I see this elsewhere. I think even your organization is doing this, and that is to make sure that there's a respirator program and we have these checklists and everyone's making sure, emphasizing more fit testing. But in my experience, I think there's another issue. People, in my experience, are just checking off the boxes. Yeah, they did a fit test, and yeah, they did the training. But I think we need to add a couple of boxes, and that box there is, yeah, but has it been done well? Is it being done correctly? And I've tried to address some of these issues in my past newsletters, specifically in the November 2021 issue, and I've given some examples where fit testing is being done, but it's just not being done correctly. So whenever I do my 2-day fit testing workshops, I always bring up this question to the attendees, and that is, what does an employee think when they've been told they pass a fit test, regardless of the type of fit test? The answer to that is, this is what they're hearing. When they're told that they pass a fit test, this is what they hear, and that is, I can take this respirator and wear it in an atmosphere known to be hazardous to my health, and I'm going to be protected. That's what they hear. And if this fit test isn't being done correctly, that can put them in a potentially hazardous environment. So I'll go through this kind of quick because Krista did it at the opening, but perhaps some of you may have missed it. So I'll just go through this kind of quickly here. So what is a qualitative fit test? A qualitative fit test is a pass-fail test that relies on the subject's sensory response to detect a challenge agent. And those tests can be things such as irritant smoke, banana oil, sweetener, or Bitrex. And a couple of pictures of those methods are shown here. Many listeners, I'm sure, are fit testing filtering face piece respirators, such as N95 filtering face piece respirators. And the key here is that when you fit test filtering face piece respirators, neither the irritant smoke or the banana oil method cannot be used, because those agents will penetrate through the filter material and therefore are not measuring respirator fit. However, that raises the question, so how does an employee wearing an N95 filtering face piece respirator pass a fit test with irritant smoke or banana oil? Because I've had emails, comments sent to me, phone calls, photographs, saying, hey, I've been fit tested with irritant smoke and banana oil, and I've been told I passed the fit test. Well, how does this occur? The way that it occurs very simply is that they're not administering the test properly. So if you don't have an adequate challenge, you're not going to detect a poorly fitting respirator. If you don't have an adequate challenge, the irritant smoke or the banana oil is not going to penetrate through the filter material. You're just basically wasting time. So there are protocols on how fit tests should be done. For example, with regard to the saccharin and the Bitrex solution, we find them in the mandatory appendix of the respiratory protection standard, and you have your protocols in Canada are similar for whenever you administer the sweetener test or the bitter agent. So I heard Krista mention that she prefers quantitative fit testing. I certainly personally prefer quantitative fit testing. And there's a number of reasons for that, and I'm sure that's been covered by others. But the fact of the matter is, while some of us may prefer quantitative fit testing, the reality is the majority of respirator fit tests that are conducted qualitatively. And because the majority of these tests are done qualitatively, I'm going to put a little bit more emphasis, or time rather, not emphasis, but time, on why poorly fitting respirators will pass a qualitative fit test, other than the subjective nature of it. So I'll begin with this question. So if you're familiar, most of the people in the audience have probably seen a qualitative fit test done, or they may have had it done to themselves. Or you may have talked to people who have been fit tested with either sweetener or Bitrex. Whenever I have a person who's told me that they've been fit tested, and I say, well, what method did they use? And they say, well, it was sweet, there's something sweet or something bitter. I then ask them this question, and that is essentially, and I'll ask you this way, when conducting respirator fit testing according to the OSHA protocols with sweetener or Bitrex, the minimum number of squeezes of the fit test solution, that's the strong solution, just the strong solution, when the respirator passes. So this person says they went through the fit test, they were told that the respirator fit, the minimum number of squeezes, well, let's give you some choices here. Is it 1 to 10, 11 to 20, 21 to 50, 51 to 74, or is it 75? And the answer, and only answer to this, is 75 squeezes. So when I hear someone say, well, I don't know, I didn't count it, such as when my wife was fit tested by her employer locally, or a former employer, I should say, and she came back and she told me, well, I didn't count it. And I said, well, give me an idea. How many times did they squeeze this thing? And she says, I don't know. I told you I didn't count it. And I said, well, give me an idea. Was it 25 times? And she said, oh, God, no. Was it 15 times? Oh, no, not even close. Was it 10 times? She says, I told you I didn't count it. Like, give me an idea. She says, I don't know. Maybe it's like 3, 4, or 5 times. Well, right away, we know that the fit test hasn't been administered correctly. So when you look at this protocol, which again is the most common protocol in the US, probably the most common protocol used in Canada, certainly the most common protocol used worldwide. If you look at the minimum, the required number of squeezes rather, assuming that the taste threshold screening was detected quickly, and for this example, we can say anything between 1 and 10 squeezes of the weak solution. When the fit test is administered while the person's wearing the respirator inside that enclosure, this test requires that you start off with 10 squeezes of that strong solution. Then every 30 seconds, another 5 squeezes is administered into that enclosure to help maintain that challenge concentration, because the aerosol that's delivered is rather heavy. It is being influenced by gravity, and that aerosol is beginning to settle out towards the floor. At the end of the 1 minute, we begin the second exercise. And with that beginning of the second exercise, we do deep breathing. Keep in mind, at the start of each of these exercises, we maintain that concentration with 5 additional squeezes. And then halfway through each of the exercises, we give 5 squeezes to try and maintain that challenge concentration. When you total up the number of the initial squeezes plus the number of squeezes that's given every 30 seconds, the minimum number of squeezes is 75 squeezes of that test solution. So that's a very quick way that a respirator program administrator can get a handle on whether or not these tests are being administered properly. I'll go through this a little quickly here. So whenever the sweetener or Bitrex test is done, there's basically 2 phases. One is a threshold screening procedure that's simply done to determine if the subject can detect the taste, the agent. So can you taste the sweetener? Can you taste the bitter agent? So it's a weak solution, no respirators worn, and then you spray it into the enclosure, similar to what you see me doing here. And then you record the number of squeezes that it takes for that person to taste that agent. And the recorded number will be either a 10, a 20, or 30, depending upon when they taste it. So if it's within the first 10 squeezes, we record that as, or count that as a 10. If the subject can't detect the taste, then we try a different agent, or we stop, or we can even try a different fit test method. In the second phase, what the person does is they're going to put the respirator on. They will conduct their seal checks. If they're successful, then we place the enclosure over their head, and then we instruct the subject to breathe through their mouth. And then what will happen is then we're going to insert the nebulizer with the strong solution into the enclosure and spray it 10, 20, or 30 squeezes initially based on the number of squeezes required to elicit that taste response during the threshold screening. An example of that fit test being administered is shown on the bottom right of your screen here with a stronger solution. And in this case, I'm using the QualFit software is being shown at the bottom right. So then every 30 seconds to maintain that challenge concentration, we will administer 1/2 the number of squeezes as I previously mentioned. So keep in mind that there are 7 exercises. They're each 1 minute in length. So the total exercise time is 7 minutes. Now that 7 minutes is important because this has to do with human behavior. So when we think of what type of human errors could cause a poorly fitting respirator to pass this fit test, here is the list that I normally refer to. One is the fit test operator may not squeeze it the correct number of times. They may shortchange it, as I previously discussed. Exercise times are 1 minute each. Well, those 1 minutes may get shortened to something less than 1 minute in length. Or the operator may start to skip exercises. Or they may be using the incorrect exercises. My wife, for example, was told she wasn't given any instructions on specific exercises. She was told to move her head as if she was at work. Or the person may be have incorrect use of the equipment or modified the equipment. The bottom line is, if the challenge concentration is not maintained, a poorly fitting face piece can pass the fit test. Getting back to skipping exercises, so there's 7 required exercises, and someone might just choose to do 3 or 4 of the 7, skip, say, deep breathing or whichever one they want. Or in other cases, operators may confuse. In the US, we have these OSHA accepted fast fit protocols that were developed for quantitative fit testing. These fast protocols accepted for ambient aerosol methods, those methods have a 4 exercise protocol, but those are only permitted for quantitative fit testing with ambient aerosol and not permitted to be used with the qualitative fit test methods. So already mentioned that qualitative respirator fit testing is the most common method for fit testing healthcare workers. Everyone, however, when you look at human behavior, everyone is in a hurry. Total exercise time now becomes 2 to 3 minutes, not 7. Of course, the person being fit tested doesn't know the test was administered incorrectly, nor does the employer in many cases. So these errors will permit poorly fitting respirators to pass the fit test. And I'll be discussing quantitative fit testing a little bit later too. So as I mentioned, I personally prefer quantitative fit testing. I was chair of the ANSI standard that developed the fit testing protocols that were published by ANSI, now by ASTM. They're the same ones used, essentially same ones used by OSHA. But you know what? You give up after 20, 30 years of preaching to use quantitative fit tests. People don't all listen. So in response to seeing these tests being commonly done incorrectly, that's where QualFit software, why QualFit software was developed to try and resolve this problem. So when the software is used, basically what happens, it's computer operated. You enter information about the subject, type of respirator being worn, just like quantitative. And then what happens is you hit a start button, and it will walk the operator through each of the 7 1-minute exercises to ensure that the correct number of squeezes is given for each exercise at the proper time in the proper sequence. So if you're looking at the screen for the software, what it will do is it will start off by calculating the correct number of squeezes to deliver for each exercise. So it tells you initially how many squeezes to give, and then every 30 seconds how many to give. And then in addition, it has a counter that will count down in real time how much time is remaining before you get to the next exercise. So the software will automate and track each step of the fit testing procedure. If the person detects the agent, you stop the test. It tells you when they detected it. And then if you choose the printed report, you can get a printed report similar to what you see in the right side of your screen over here. And this printed report will comply with all OSHA record keeping requirements, including, it'll also include comments by the operator, such as, probably can't see on this screen, but it says this person was tested with their safety glasses on, no problems with the test procedure. And so we record the make, the model, the style, and the size of the respirator that was used, and now we have that documentation, which is often not available during qualitative fit tests. So there's a number of benefits of giving some structure to this qualitative fit test. Some of the features of the software are provided at the top here. Some of the report features are shown at the bottom. It also, you can export the data and then retrieve it, identify when does a person due for a fit test, how many did I do last month, how many did I do last year, etc. But let's explore some additional reasons why poorly fitting respirators will pass a fit test here. OSHA has instructions, but the instructions are not sufficient to replace proper training. For example, OSHA will say, to produce the aerosol, the nebulizer bulb is firmly squeezed so that it collapses completely and then released and allowed to fully expand. Well, that's good guidance. I don't deny that guidance. But OSHA doesn't tell the operator how to squeeze the bulb or the speed at which it should be squeezed. Both of these will affect the aerosol output. So let me show you a quick 1 minute and 15-second video. A common error that you'll watch, even in training videos. We won't mention in the US, one of these organizations in the US begins with the letter C, ends with the letter C, and has 3 letters as their name. You saw this, they developed some training videos during COVID, but training videos, well, they are what they are. So let me just show you a quick video about the importance of how, if you use your fingertips, how it affects the aerosol concentration.
And then lastly, when you squeeze the nebulizer, you need to use your entire hand. That may not have been obvious when you were watching me, but you squeeze with your fingers all the way into your hand. If I use my fingertips, if you watch a lot of training videos, you'll notice they're squeezing it like this. Very little, if anything, comes out if you do that. Let me show you by removing the top. Put a little bit more liquid in here. So watch what happens if I just slowly squeeze with my fingertips. Probably don't see anything coming out. Now, if I squeeze it with my palm, you might be able to see a large amount of aerosol coming out. Again, I'll go with my fingertips. If you use your fingertips, don't squeeze it completely. Essentially nothing comes out. Squeeze it, completely compress it, allow it to completely expand before the next squeeze. So,
okay, so I think that video kind of shows you, I wouldn't have been able to do that live in the web here. I think that definitely shows you how the lack of aerosol that's produced when a person is simply using their fingertips, which obviously affects the aerosol concentration. And then ANSI, AIHA, and now ASTM, as well as ISO. So ISO has guidelines on how to administer respirator fit tests. They say, quote, to produce the aerosol, grip the bulb, the squeeze bulb, in the palm of the hand, not the fingers only. So they clarify not the fingers only, and firmly squeeze the nebulizer bulb so that it collapses completely. Then release it and allow it to fully expand. So they point out what I showed you in the video about not using the fingers. But neither of these organizations specifically mentioned that if you squeeze it too slowly, little or no aerosol is produced either. So even if you put it in the squeeze bulb in your palm of your hand and you squeeze it slowly, very little to no aerosol will come out. And in that case, a poorly fitting respirator will pass due to insufficient challenge concentration. OSHA doesn't specifically mention that excessive tilting of the nebulizer affects the aerosol output either. ANSI and ISO do say the following, however. They say that you should maintain the nebulizer in an upright vertical position when spraying the aerosol. In the bottom right, you see a photograph of somebody holding the nebulizer upside down. That just causes the liquid to empty out of the nebulizer. You're not generating any aerosol in that manner. And then when you turn it upright, you probably lost your liquid, so you're not going to be able to challenge the face piece on the subsequent exercises anyway. So that respirator is going to likely pass. Let me show you some of how this occurs. I'm going to skip the video to save some time here, but if you look, and hopefully you can see my pointer, but down at the bottom right here, well, far right, I'm showing this commonly called a jet. So this piece here slides into the top of the well for the nebulizer. There's a small little gap right here. The pickup for the liquid, if you notice, this is not perfectly flat. That's because the liquid's going to be drawn through the back of this jet over here. Moving over to this picture on the left side of my screen. So when you have this, there's actually liquid in here right now. Here's the liquid film right there. But since the pickup on the jet is on the back side, if you tilt this forward, now what happens is the amount of liquid is diminishing in the well. If there's no insufficient amount of liquid on the backside here, it's not going to be aspirated and deliver an aerosol. So no aerosol, no challenge agent, you don't detect anything, you say that respirator passes. The OSHA standard also doesn't specify where to direct the aerosol output. ANSI and OSHA, and ISO both do, where they say that, quote, at least in the ANSI standard, quote, insert the nebulizer nozzle into the opening of the front of the hood and direct the aerosol into the void between the side of the respirator and the hood. In other words, here's a photograph showing a qualitative fit test being done. And if we ask what's wrong here, well, what this person was doing when I took this photograph, what they were doing here is they were pointing the opening of the nebulizer directly into the filtering face piece respirator. Well, so if you point it into the filter and the person breathes in, what you're essentially doing is you're trying to replicate the NIOSH certification test to establish that this filter is designed to stop aerosols from passing through. So all you're doing there is spraying it into the filter. Well, we already know that the filter's been tested by NIOSH. It's going to stop the aerosol. Now you're simply putting an object in the way of the aerosol, diminishing the aerosol concentration inside the chamber. What the operator needs to do is to direct the aerosol into the void. So when the person's doing normal breathing, you're going to direct it to the right side and left side. When the person turns their head, say, to the right, now that exposes the left sealing surface of the respirator, you're going to direct that aerosol towards where that potential leak site is. When that person's looking up, now you're exposing the bottom of the respirator sealing surface. That's when you're going to direct your aerosol in that void there. But clearly what you don't do is you don't spray it right into the filter. That's not going to provide a sufficient challenge. Here's another common mistake. I've got lots of these photographs that have been sent to me. But if we ask what's the person doing wrong here? Well, the most obvious thing here is they're spraying the aerosol into the wrong hole. So a lot of these kits have an opening. Well, there's a hole that you can't see that's right about where my pointer is. But then there's also another opening in the collar that's used to give structure and support to the enclosure, the hood, which is over this person's head. And so you see people spraying that agent into, basically you're spraying it into their chest. And if you spray it into the chest, now it's going to deposit, you're impacting it up against the chest, and you're not getting the aerosol up by the sealing surfaces of the respirator. Here's another photograph from another organization where they're demonstrating how they do their fit testing. And once again, that aerosol is being sprayed into the chest rather than around the perimeter of the sealing surfaces of the respirator. So let's talk about some areas with quantitative fit testing, because a lot of people are under the impression that, well, if you do a quantitative fit test, then everything must be fine, and that's not the case. People need to be trained on quantitative fit test equipment, just like they need to be trained properly on qualitative fit test equipment. So let's take a look at some of the common types of errors that can occur in this type of scenario. One of the most common errors is, now this is obviously going to be make and model specific, but when you look at, what I've done is I removed the inhalation valve from the inside of the respirator here so that you can look inside of it. The person who is conducting the fit test has to, they have to take their interior tubing with ambient aerosol fit testing and pass it through one of the 3 pie shapes that are available. And then keep in mind there's another valve opening on the opposite side of the facepiece. Well, what's commonly not known is that some of those pie shapes will cause the interior tubing to kink. And if you have a kink in the tubing, then what's going to happen is you don't pull an air sample. If you don't pull an air sample, then even if you have a poorly fitting respirator, you're going to get a high fit factor. So keep in mind that, so usually kinks can't be seen. They're going to be hidden behind the inhalation valve. That's going to cover everything that you're seeing right here. In this photo, the inhalation valve was removed. There are lots of different ways that this tubing can be kinked. Keep in mind that this interior tubing should be replaced with each fit test. People don't always do that. If they don't replace it, what will happen is the tubing also gets weak, and then it's even more susceptible to collapse and kinking. What I'm showing here is this interior tubing was properly positioned initially, but the length of the tubing was not correct. So after the fit test was conducted, I think I have a blow up of it here. After the fit test was conducted, I told the person doing the test, I said, you didn't attach that tubing properly. And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, I don't believe these fit factors. And when they removed the facepiece, had them lower the facepiece, and what you can see here is that the clip, so we got this metal clip here that is positioned on the suction cup. If the length of the tubing isn't cut at the appropriate length, sometimes this clip will rotate, and when it rotates, it then causes this excessive bend in the tubing, which is obstructing the ability to get a correct sample. If you don't get a good sample, if you kink the tubing, you're going to pass the fit test, or at the very least get higher fit factors. My screen's blocking off the top, so I can't see this here. But these fit tested adapters aren't all necessarily made equally well for fit testing. That's a problem that I have, has to do with the people that make these adapters. But for some adapters, the interior tubing is really thick. On this particular adapter, this interior tubing is not very thin. It's very difficult to pass it through the opening on the inhalation valve and then get it to attach midway between the nose and the mouth of the person who's being fit tested. So what this fit test operator did is, to avoid that, they simply pulled the interior tubing further out, and now what they're doing is they've positioned the opening to the tubing, so you can see the clip here, but unfortunately there is another inhalation valve on the respirator, so they're taking an air sample between the filter, the P100 filter, and the inhalation valve of the respirator, and that's going to be clean air rather than collecting a sample inside the mask in the breathing zone. Fit testing, filtering face, quantitative fit testing, but filtering face piece respirators isn't always easy either. So keep in mind that when you do a quantitative fit test on the filtering face piece respirator, the fit test operator has to select, usually working on the inside, they have to pick a spot free of seams and any other obstructions that may prevent that probe from making a good seal. And sometimes, not on this example, but sometimes that best spot midway between the nose and the mouth isn't available, and they move too far, either to the point where if they move up, that opening, that sample probe may now be blocked by the nose, or they may go too low, and now that sample probe may be up against the person's chin. So, and if it's not touching the nose or touching the chin at the time that they install it, sometimes some of these filtering face piece respirators are made with very flexible materials. On the upper left, this is an example of what I would call a rigid cup-shaped design. It frequently isn't going to collapse when the person inhales, but go back here. On some face pieces, such as this one here, there is very, very little dead space in this respirator. That's great for breathing. I mean, it makes it easier to breathe. You have less dead space, so that's a good feature. On the other hand, it becomes a nightmare for the fit test operator, because what happens is you're trying to find a cavity to take an air sample from, and then every time that person inhales, that face piece collapses against the face. And now when it collapses against the face, your equipment is not able to suck air from the interior of the face piece. And now if there is a leak, you're not going to be able to make a measurement, or you're not going to detect that leakage. And then in other cases, when we ask why do poorly fitting respirators pass respirator fit tests, there are things that are going to be common to both qualitative and quantitative fit tests. And I'll just use this example here of the rainbow passage. Not a lot of people that I fit test. So when you're looking at blue collar workers, their reading skills may not be very good. And because they're embarrassed about their reading skills, and one of the things you don't want to do, in my opinion, is you don't want them to try and read something when their reading skills are unknown or they're not very good. Because what happens, here's what I might do. So I might say, when sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act like a prism and they form a rainbow. Well, if you were able to see me, I had to take I inhaled when I said and form a rainbow. If I inhale, now if there's a leak, now that leak will be detected. That person, if they're spraying sweetener or Bitrex, they may taste the sweetener or the Bitrex. If you're doing ambient aerosol, like with a port account or an AccuFit 9000, now that machine will count that particle. However, if the person is embarrassed about their reading skills, instead of reading it loudly, they end up doing, and you may not hear it, but they go, when sunlight strikes raindrops in the air, they act like a prism and form a rainbow. The rainbow is a division of white light into et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what happens here is they're not moving their jaw. They're not challenging that face piece. They can go for a much longer length of time before they ever inhale. And if you don't inhale, it doesn't make a difference. You can have a leak, but if you don't inhale, you're not going to capture that challenge agent. You're not going to measure that challenge agent. That respirator is going to pass. The other thing is, in my opinion, too many fit test operators, they're kind of afraid that they don't want a person necessarily to pass. They may not, to fail. They may have lots of pressure by their employer. Maybe they're expected to do 4 fit tests an hour or some other number of fit tests per hour. So when they ask a person to turn their head, that person's maybe not turning their head, maybe they're not evaluating it properly to make sure that they actually inhale when they turn their head. And it doesn't make a difference if you're using sweetener or Bitrex or ambient aerosol. If that person doesn't inhale when their head is turned, then you're not going to measure that leakage adequately. So my plan was to try and go about 40 minutes, between 40 and 45 minutes, and I think that I'm pretty close to that right now. I can't read this on my slide, but I believe it says that this was just a tip of the iceberg. There's many other reasons why poorly fitting respirators can pass a fit test. Most other people concentrate on the opposite, why good fitting respirators fail. I'm taking my concern often is that's a poorly fitting respirator and it just passed that fit test, but I'm not confident you did this correctly. Let's investigate this. So lots of other reasons. This is one reason why if you're a fit test operator or if you're overseeing fit test operators, you want to make sure they get some structured in training, whether it be by taking formal training or in the classroom setting or some other way. They need training. You just can't read these guidelines. You just can't read the instruction manual. Fit testing is a skill and it takes experience, and you need that skill and experience to do it right. I can tell you as a fit test operator, I'm continuously learning how to improve on my technique as I experience different respirators. The other is, I tell people that have been fit tested, if you're a respirator wearer, you should be checking the credentials of the person who's administering this test. And if they're not properly trained, you may have to be suspicious about that particular test.
Dr. McKay, can I interrupt right now with a question about that?
Sure.
This is from Kevin Hedges. He wants to know, how important do you think it is to have a fit tester accreditation process for the fit tester and the fit testing training provider? Is that
I think that helps, but accreditation, people get accredited, and that helps, but even accreditation programs aren't all going to be the same. So you want to seek out a trainer that's experienced. I can tell you, I offer NIOSH approved spirometry training programs, and I see instructional videos by NIOSH and others, and they're helpful. And I wish in the United States we had an accreditation program for fit testing. So yes, they're needed, but they're beneficial. So let's put it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Not going to solve it all, but they'll help a bit.
Yeah, it's not going to solve everything. We're never going to solve everything. But I'm a believer in it. I think what you guys are doing in Canada is certainly a better approach than what's being done in the United States. But even those people will need to take training from an even more experienced trainer from time to time.
And I have another question from Marie Claude. She's saying the taste of Bitrex can persist after the verification, and I know I've experienced that too. Could be longer for fit testing. But is there a, was it already discussed to verify subject sensibility to Bitrex after the fit testing? So how are you sure that tasting the Bitrex is not fit failure, but persistence of the Bitrex taste?
Okay, so this is what most people cover. Most people are covering, in that case, what's going to happen is that you have a good fitting respirator that gets rejected. It's the opposite of what my presentation has been, and that's okay. Whether it be sweetener or Bitrex, both of them can persist. One trick with Bitrex is to offer them a piece of chocolate. Chocolate tends to help get rid of that taste a little bit better. For both of the agents, individuals should be instructed to have a glass. Every fit test operator should have water available when using these methods. And after the threshold screening, the person should be rinsing their mouth with the water. So you need to have a sink nearby where they can spit it out, or they spit it out outside or some other way. But they should be rinsing their mouth after the threshold screening with water, nothing other than water. And then you need to have a soft cloth or a disposable wipe that doesn't have any chemical on it. And they should be rinsing that material away from their lips and their cheek because you get some residual there. And then before you go ahead and use the enclosure with the strong agent, you need to make sure that the fit test operator is airing out that enclosure. So if the same enclosure has been used for the fit test as well as for the threshold screening, you need to air out that enclosure by swinging it around 5 or 6 times to get the residual material out of that enclosure. So the bottom line is, if the person has any residual taste remaining, you shouldn't even be beginning the second stage with the stronger agent.
Thank you. We have another question. Are you aware of any research done on the impact of poorly fitting respirators at workplaces? Curious if we can quantitatively measure the positive impact of doing the test properly. I'm not aware of any research, but I know that if it's not done properly, you're going to have occupational diseases down the road from exposures.
Well, most of these diseases are chronic. Most respirators are used for chronic diseases, asbestos, silica dust, things of that nature. Well, you can get acute silicosis, but in many cases, we often don't know if the respirator is not fitting after the fit test. Seal checks are not as good as fit tests. If they were, we wouldn't have to do fit testing. So seal checks are valuable. People often don't do them correctly either. If I think the question, though, when I originally heard it, had to say, have there been any studies to quantitatively assess whether or not, what is the impact of respirators that falsely pass? What is that impact? And I'm not aware of those. They usually go unnoticed.
Okay, thank you.
So there are training classes available, and right now I think we're right at the end. So let's go ahead and handle all the questions that people may have. And these can be things that I did cover or didn't cover in this presentation, but I tried to give a completely different approach than most people are concerned about when a person fails a fit test. And my presentation here is what does it mean when they pass? So
I have a question from Ina, and I think you addressed the answer. So Ina, your question is, how do we know a person's ability to taste? And I think that was answered after you asked it, but just to clarify, in case you missed it, you're doing a challenge test before you're even putting it on. So they have to tell you if they can taste or detect it.
Yeah, and we call that threshold screening. So there's a threshold screening step. And by the way, that's another common mistake. People often skip the threshold screen to save time. They skip the threshold screening. The purpose of the threshold screening is to identify, can a person detect either the sweetener, bitter, or this bitter agent, or in the case of using banana oil, are they able to detect this a weak odor of the isoamyl acetate, the banana oil, or if you're using irritant smoke, can they detect a weak concentration of the irritant? So there are these threshold screening procedures that are done first, but in many cases, well, many may not be correct. I've certainly observed, and by training a lot of people, have people tell me that, oh, we've never done that. Or if they do the threshold screening, what happens is they don't use the enclosure. This happened a lot during COVID because of hygiene concerns. If you don't use the enclosure, now you're not controlling that threshold screening. So the purpose of the threshold screening is to establish that 1 to 100-fold difference in challenge concentration. When you pass a qualitative fit test with sweetener Bitrex, that's equivalent to a fit factor of 100. You don't know if it's a 105 or a 310 or a 720, but when the test is properly done, the assumption that's made there is you've just achieved a fit factor of at least 100. But if you don't do the threshold screening properly, now that assumption's false.
Question here, is there a quick check for persons who have COVID to see if their sense of taste is recovered? But I think that, I mean, there are people who don't have a sense of taste ever. And so in that case, you'd be looking at, you wouldn't be able to do any qualitative testing. You'd have to look at quantitative, I believe.
Primarily for filtering taste pieces, yes. So the other, you still have the option qualitatively. Well, it depends upon which respirators you're going to fit test. So for if they're doing qualitative fit testing and the respirator is an elastomeric, they still have the option of using isoamyl acetate because the person may or may not have lost the sensation of odor for that material. And you still have irritant smoke. I'm not a proponent of irritant smoke, but you still have that as an option. And if those options aren't either convenient or available, then quantitative is independent of their ability to sense an odor or taste. But even with the COVID, some people may have lost a lot of their sensation for most of that loss may affect sweet or bitter differently. And so they may take more squeezes of the threshold screening to pick it up, but it may still be possible to do it. And if not, then you go quantitative.
Do you have suggestions for automatic squeezers to avoid having a person use their hands to squeeze?
So yeah, TSI, for example, developed a device called, I think it was called QFit, which used a motorized pump. There wasn't a lot of interest in it, so that's no longer available. But the problem that I've seen with some of the motorized things is that the delivery systems have not undergone independent testing to evaluate their ability to detect fit factors of 100. So they may have a sensitivity or specificity that's either too low or too high. But ultimately getting away from a handheld squeeze bowl is the direction to go.
Okay.
From an operator perspective.
We have more questions, but I know your time is limited. So we'll wrap it up with you, but I'll let the people know that are watching, everyone can know that we're going to be staying on here for a few more minutes, so we will get to your questions as best we can. But I just wanted to thank you very much for your time, Dr. McKay. We were thrilled when you agreed to present to us, because you really are as the guru. I've learned so much from you.
I hope that it was helpful, and I guess, did you take it away, the screen sharing? So are you guys good, or do I need to do that?
I think you have to do it, but it'll stop automatically when you leave regardless.
Okay, yeah, I don't even see where I have that option, so I think I am going to have to leave.
At the
Somehow
top,
I lost it.
if you scroll at the top of your screen, it should come up again as
Oh, I see it. There we go. Okay, yep. Now I see it. Okay. All right. Well, I do have to go.
Yes.
And thank you very much. I love the opportunity and wish you and your participants great success in the future. Remember,
Thank you, Dr. McKay.
remember, do it right or don't do it at all.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, so we will continue with questions. There are lots of great questions in here. One question I saw was in Ontario during COVID, the government has asked all hospitals to test staff on the 1870 model due to domestic production that started mid-pandemic. Some hospitals are reporting 95% or more passing on the model. Others report 60%. That is going to be a number of factors. That's going to be based on your population that you have. That's going to be based on how good the fit testers are. So it's going to be, you really can't look at the percentage and say this is right or wrong. You may have an organization with a lot of, let's say, petite women, and that model may not, I'm not sure, but let's say that model doesn't fit petite women as well. And so that organization is going to have a lower pass rate, or it may not fit wide jaws well, and another organization may have more than average wide jaws, people with wide jaws. So it's going to be very dependent. You need a large hospital organization to have enough people to say this is definitely going to be the percentage that you're going to hit. I would think that some of that, especially when you're getting to 95% passing, there might be an element of the fit tester there. Kevin and Val, you're welcome to put your screens on as well and help me field some of these questions.
Well, I actually had a question about that question. Is the 1870 plus a port account model or is it a mask model? Michael, who asked the question, is that?
Oh, I assumed it was the 1870 plus respirator model, but you're right, maybe there's a port account with that number too.
But I don't know. I mean, I think your answer. Go ahead.
I was just going to say it's a 3M N95 model of respirator, which is a broad fitting respirator. And certainly to your point, some people would fit it better than others. It's just we get a lot of pushback from supply chain groups saying, well, why can't you fit test people the way that people at another similar academic hospital, like we're the group with the 5,000 people in our program, where hundreds of people have had to be fit tested 5 or 6 times in the last year because of supply chain, right? So we just get a lot of pressure on that. I was just curious if other hospitals or anybody else on the call was finding something similar.
Okay, well, I'll open that up to anybody else from hospitals or healthcare or anywhere that uses that model. If you've been reporting a really high pass rate or a more moderate pass rate. I know I at one point did some fit testing for a hospital system, and we got about 60% on any given model that we tested. So we could get 60% with one model and then a little over 60% with the other model, and those people could pick which one they wanted. And so there were 3 or 4 models we had to get everyone covered. But that was a small hospital system. That was not a 5,000 person hospital system. So is there anybody on here who's also from healthcare who can speak to that?
Hi, it's Sheila from CHEO in Ottawa. We have used the 1870 plus. We have about 4 or 5 as well. And generally that is the one that fits most people. But we definitely have to have other models to be able to fit the number of staff.
Do you use quantitative or qualitative?
Generally qualitative, and then for those that can't do it, or if we're just trying to do a blitz, we'll use a quantitative.
Mm-hmm.
We have about 3,500 staff that we have to fit test, so we just couldn't do it qualitatively or quantitatively with everyone.
Right.
I'm interested to hear how you guys received Dr. McKay's tips, I guess, and critique of the common mistakes in qualitative fit testing, or anyways, do you think how does that reflect, I guess, or how are you reflecting on that in terms of your own program and maybe going back to like making sure that the device gets squeezed quickly and effectively, or some of the other pieces that he mentioned?
I think they're good for quality checks. I do think that we have a pretty robust fit tester training program, and I think they are trained according to the CSA standard. But again, like the individual, how they may hold it, I think those are some really good FYIs for the fit testers.
For sure, I definitely learned some good tips in there. We have two very similar questions, so I'm going to read both of them and then we can talk a little bit about the difference in the standards. So the first question is, we do 30 seconds per exercise in Ontario. Would you be able to tell me where to find information that supports 30 seconds or 1 minute timing for exercise? The next question is, can you comment on the difference in fit test exercises by CSA of 30 seconds versus OSHA of 1 minute? Unfortunately, Dr. McKay really did have to leave when he did, so we weren't able to get his answer on that. I will say that the standards are very different standards in that regard. They were developed by different groups, both with experts. So whichever standard you follow is going to be fine. Just follow that standard. Don't cherry pick a little bit from one and a little bit from the other. If you're going to use OSHA, then go ahead and use that 1 minute test. I don't know if it would impact the pass criteria. If you have a good fit and you have a good fit tester, I would think that it wouldn't change it. But then it becomes, do you have a good fit? I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it would make a difference. Kevin or Val or anybody else, do you have any thoughts? Kevin, you're muted, Kevin. Sorry.
Still can't hear you.
You know, one of my past jobs as an occupational hygienist, overseeing a lead mine, like I'm certified as an occupational hygienist and I'm a certified industrial hygienist, but just having that certification, I wouldn't have looked at the instructions about how to do fit testing. So, you know, being certified didn't give me a license to do fit testing. We did get somebody from 3M who I knew very well. He had a lot of experience. So I had a lot of faith in the methodology that he used. So my concern here is that, how do we know if somebody's offering to do fit testing that they're competent and they have the right credentials to do that? And maybe that's not an easy answer. And that's my whole concern about having an accreditation program. You know, for example, Sheila was talking about the fit testing that's done at the hospital. You know, who have trained the fit testers and who's trained the person training the fit testers? I think that's a really important thing to address. It might be long term, but I just wanted to raise that as an issue here. Thanks.
When I was a fit tester, I did training from the manufacturer, and then I did additional training from Dr. McKay. And I have to say that he offers an accreditation as well. I did not do enough courses for his full accreditation. As he said, you have to look at the accreditation as well. But, you know, even having done that course with him, I still learned lots of things today. There's so much out there on respirator fit testing that you're right. Just having a quick train the trainer session that's half an hour may not be enough, but what is enough? And that's a bigger question than we can answer. And different organizations answer it differently. Some have really intensive train the trainer programs, which are wonderful programs, and others send their folks out for accreditation training through someone like Dr. McKay or other organizations. So it's not having one standard makes it very, it's hard to compare them. Kevin, you were telling me a bit about the Australian and the British. Can you tell me about those standards for their country?
Yeah, I have colleagues in Australia in occupational hygiene. So the RespFit accreditation program, it's for both trainers and for fit testers. But it's actually, there's a group called RespFit that's rolled it out, but it's also heavily supported by the Australian Institute of Occupational Hygienists. There's also a similar scheme in New Zealand, and there's also the same, the Fit to Fit accreditation scheme in the UK. And I think, you know, collectively, the occupational hygiene fraternity perhaps could think about in the long term developing an accreditation process program for fit testers in Canada.
It's Sheila. I'll just speak to the question that
I think
Kevin.
in the interim though, you know, people on the call, how do they know where to go? That's the thing. It's, you know, hopefully they'll have seen that there's a lot of traps. It's not just a simple technique here, but it's about really exploring, you know, the person that's actually doing the fit testing and what experience and credentials do they have to do that. Sorry, Sheila.
I was just gonna respond to your question about what do we do. So I know that we have organizations like 3M and Fisher Scientific where we would go to the trainer, and then the trainers would train the staff. And within the hospitals in the respiratory protection program, there's a person that's responsible for that, and they actually have to ensure that the fit testers are following the criteria that's set up in the CSA standard as part of their responsibility.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask about the Aura, which is the 1870, I think, is the model that, because people are commenting that it's got quite good, I guess, universal fit, we've been giving them out to migrant farm workers over the course of the past year as part of our outreach and COVID prevention efforts with them. And we found that they experienced some frustration with, I think it's with the re-wearing of them because of the way they're, you know, when you put it on and it's all stiff and you put it on, you can separate it and you can fit it quite nicely and it fits like a glove, I guess. But that I think maybe in their working conditions, they can't be reused as frequently as has been, you know, thought that a respirator can be used 40 times or something like that, as long as it's not filthy, and it depends on the environments. But I just wondered if anyone had run into problems like that in certain areas, that depending on the type of work that they were problematic. So they fit tested the day when you put it on, because no one ever fit tests a respirator that's been worn before. So maybe that's a bigger question about just reusing them at all. So
I can answer that partially. Again, it's Sheila from CHEO. We actually did with some of the people from the Research Institute when we were looking at were we going to have to reuse the respirators?
Yeah,
and we actually did fit people on they weren't sterilized, but they were, you know, how they were, whatever the process was, and they did have a good fit after that. But we didn't go down the road of reuse. We did extended use, and we managed to, I think a lot of us kind of squeak under the fence of not actually running out, but we did have to train people, as someone else said, on multiple respirators. But overall, you know, the 1870 plus has always been the best fitting respirator of the other ones that we have. So I'm not surprised that most people have a high percentage of people that fit it, because it's for the number of years that I've been involved, which is like 15 plus, it's always been the respirator that's fit most people.
And I'll add to that, I saw two comments that I didn't see right away, one from Shelley. Hi, Shelley, and one from Aaron. Hi again, Aaron. Both saying they have a high pass rate for their 1870 plus models. So that's speaking to that. For why one organization's not, I think that was Michael's organization. I mean, sometimes that's just the way it goes with your population. I wouldn't give it too much worry. I would assume that it's correct and go on that, but having some refresher for your fit testers, if you think that's what it is an option, but I would assume that is likely right, because I have found 60 to 70 is pretty common percentage for most respirators. I haven't used that 1870 plus model though, so take that with a grain of salt. I see, Michael, your hand's up, so feel free to jump in.
Perfect. So just to that very last comment, actually, we're somewhere in the 70-72% range for the 1870 plus. It's just some of our other colleagues had communicated that they were in the very high 90s, was really more the reason that I was asking there. But Sheila, you jumped in on the same kind of comment. So again, as part of that, what are we going to do when we do eventually run out of respirators? Because we 100% did at our hospital. We ran out of lots of models. We actually, with the Research Institute, our project was re-sterilizing respirators. So we were treating them with 10 different ways of cleaning them using chemicals, using heat, using steam, a bunch of different ways, and then actually doing fit tests. Again, not using them for infectious patients in between. We were just using them in Occ Health. We would sterilize them however we were doing that, and then bring them back and use our port account and retest over and over. Some models work wonderfully, and other models were absolutely abysmal as to if you could get multiple fit tests after you had kind of made that nose piece, that metal strip, kind of fit to your nose. Some of them were really hard to remold it the next time you went to put it on because it might not be sitting in the exact same spot. But we did find with ones like the 1870 Plus, yeah, you could do a lot of things with them and still get them to seal afterwards without them starting to fall apart. So like we were talking, like 40 and 50 times steam treating and chemical treating these respirators, because we were collecting respirators almost to be able to reuse again in the hospital. So it was a grim year there for fit testing, but yeah, it's the same kind of experience where they do quite hold up quite well. We only ended up having to do extended use for the most part. We only had to do reuse for a couple months there, which is great because that's a huge hazard. And it kind of tied to my other question about reusable respirators and how long they can last. And I see a comment from Trevor, so I'll look for that NIOSH white paper to be able to see how long the cartridges would last in a biological atmosphere where you potentially might start growing things in your respirator.
Yes, and that's the other thing. Trevor comments, CSA is Ontario, OSHA is US. It depends on where you are because CSA is a standard. So you may, depending on where you are within Canada, not have to legislate, it's not be legislated because it is a standard. So because it's a standard, if you're not legislated to follow CSA, then you can pick what you wish to follow. And you might wish to follow OSHA. Some multinational companies that are based in Canada might require their workforce follow OSHA so that they have one standard across their workforce. And if it's not legislated that you have to follow CSA, then they have that ability to do that. But the important thing is following a standard and not cherry picking a little bit from this standard, a little bit from that standard. That each standard is developed on its own to work together. So you don't want to start cherry picking. That's my concern with that.
Can I just jump in?
Yeah, please do.
Sorry, I just thought we might want to address Trevor Fisher's question. It's a kind of an interesting.
Okay, I haven't seen it.
And it's why would farm workers be wearing N95s? I think it might raise a lot of discussion, but I know we don't have long. But I'm just wondering if we wanted to address that that open question there. Why
within agriculture?
Yes, I think it's a really pertinent question, and it would be good to share with Trevor why that's the case.
Okay, I hadn't gotten that far down in the questions. Can I keep going through the questions?
I did answer in the chat to Kevin, at least to some extent,
Sorry,
that it was for COVID prevention, but it's also an issue for pesticide application and other farm or agricultural exposures that can be respiratory hazards. So but go ahead. And I was interested, I think there's a passing reference, but I was going to ask the same question, Michael, that you raised around reusables. We have heard there are some hospitals in the US that have used them, like the one particularly in Texas that's used them for 20 years quite successfully. And we've also had speakers on here before. I guess Nicholas Smith has done the calculations that show that the economics are there for reusables, that they actually they're actually more economical and safer in the long run. But of course, there's more, right? There's a bit, there's the cleaning of the respirator itself. So there's more protocol related to it. Anyways, I would be interested in others. If you've ever tried it in your workplace or if anyone is working towards that, because I think it might be a long-term solution in some places.
Well, for sure. And I've worked with reusable elastomeric respirators quite a bit. And this, this comment, especially whether you're in agriculture or healthcare, you're going to be wearing the same half-face respirator. When it comes to, and this ties in both to Trevor's question and Michael's question, when you're looking at a reusable respirator, you have to develop a change-out schedule. So when you develop a change-out schedule, it's actually quite complex when it's a chemical cartridge. So if it's something for VOCs, for instance. It's a lot less complex when it's N95 or a P100 cartridge. If it's a particulate filter, like an N95 because on your half mask, you can have an N95 or a P100. You don't have to change it out until you feel resistance in breathing. So for healthcare, or anyone that needs to use that, you can use that and have it developed to use it for a week or a month straight until there's resistance or it's visibly soiled on the outside. You can keep reusing it. I think it becomes to an issue with infection control of how do you keep it clean. But that's the same issue that you have with a disposable N95, right? So it becomes, that's the issue, not the actual filter. Does that help a little bit, Michael, with your question?
Yes, certainly. Thanks.
Okay, and then the farm workers, I think we covered. Are we talking enforcement or internal company policies? I'm talking both, Trevor. If you're not legislated to follow the CSA standard, then enforcement is the enforcement agency has the choice to enforce what they wish, if anything. I'm scrolling through it, refresh. So now I'm trying to see where I was in the questions. I think I got all the questions, but I refreshed, so I'm not 100% sure I got them all. So please, if I missed your question, put it back in the chat right now or unmute.
I can just add to this, Krista. You know, we did have a meeting with a representative from Clean Space. So Clean Space actually provide powered air purifying respirators. So it kind of provides positive pressure. It pushes air towards the face and then out. So, you know, there are some PAPR respirators where you do still have to have a fit check, but the risk of leakage is much less because it's actually a powered air purifying respirator. And from what I'm seeing, they could be rolled out a lot more, especially in healthcare settings.
Yes, PAPRs, and actually the respirator itself is usually a NIOSH certified respirator. There isn't a CSA standard for the respirator. We should clarify, we're talking about the CSA standard for respirator fit testing and respirator fitting. Okay, Rachel's question, indication of fit. Oh, what number would be very high? We'll have to, I think it would depend what you're fit testing. If you're testing a half face or full face respirator, I would have to put that question to Roy, what number is very high, and ask him what number. Write that down. And if he can get back to me with that, I will put it as a comment on the Facebook Live video. That way you can find it. Okay. Yeah, it's going to depend on a lot of things, Trevor. You definitely are right there for sure. So what is very high for a quantitative fit test? I'm going to finish writing that. Respirators they seem so simple, but they're so complex. And as I say, I used to do fit testing, haven't done it in a while. I still have to be up to date on respirator safety. And every time I do a session like this, I'm always learning. I'm always surprised at how much I keep learning on it. And I've done the respirator changeout program with Dr. McKay, and I've done the training sessions with the manufacturers, and it's a never-ending process of learning with respirators. So that's why I was so thrilled that Dr. McKay agreed to speak to us today, because he really is the guru. Really is. We do have a couple minutes left, so if anyone has one last question, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. We'll see if we can't get to it, take it to Dr. McKay.
I was going to reiterate John Audick, our occupational hygienist from the South Central region's comment lately that respirator fit testing is a life skill that we should have more prevalent in society, actually, in our civil society, access to being able to go and get fit tested, so people can understand how safe or not their chosen respirator is. Because it's true, we know some people choose respirators based on color, some people might choose them based on comfort, and the comfort might mean it's leaking like a sieve, because then it's loose, right, and it's not too tight. So I just think, I don't know if anyone has any comments on that, or has encountered the capacity for fit testing sort of in the public realm versus the occupational realm. Of course, our focus is occupational. We want every workplace to be able to safely protect their workers, but I don't know if there's any comments on the life skill of fit testing, or the need for it publicly.
I can just quickly say something there, Val. So, you know, a number of us kind of volunteer our time with the Canadian Aerosol Transmission Coalition. And so thinking about, you know, respirators for the public and workplaces, not, you know, traditionally that come under the umbrella of, you know, formally having to have respiratory protection program. The Canadian Aerosol Transmission Coalition has provided Mask Smart 1, Mask Smart 2, and Mask Smart 3. And you can actually find links to those webinars on the link I just provided, just to get that kind of background information about seal checks and checking the face fit is good, even if you're out in the public, you know, and you're going into a congregate setting, for example. Thanks.
Those sessions, I attended all of them, and they were all excellent sessions. So the recordings are definitely valuable, and the link is in the chat. And you know what, just for the benefit of those who aren't on the chat and are watching this on Facebook Live, whether now or later, I'll make sure that that link gets put onto the Facebook Live video as well.
Great. We probably have some past videos too from the COVID series with Simon Smith and others, but I think it's time to close for the afternoon. We really appreciate everyone attending, and particularly staying around for our conversation now. We're trying to combine the knowledge translation of a subject matter expert with the dialogue of you who are in the trenches and in the workplace every day trying to solve these health and safety problems, and we're here to try and help find solutions, and we're very grateful for your continued attendance and engagement. I wanted to let you know that we're taking a bit of a hiatus on our COVID conversations until December, while we switch programming to our October series, which is starting on Thursday, October 23rd. Sorry. And I don't know, Kimberly, if you're still here, if you want to talk about the opening session, it is on our website. In fact, I will quickly go, and I should have had the link ready, I'm sorry. But they will be every Thursday starting October is it 23rd? No, it's 27th, sorry. And then through November, and there's many different subjects and speakers from across the country about preventing disease.
I think we've lost Kimberly, but I think you covered off the topic quite well.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry because my phone keeps ringing. I just wanted to put the link in the chat. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not working right now either. We've created a new calendar for our events on our website, which means there's much more logic. Obviously, a very persistent telemarketer. Anyways, there's better logic on the events, but it's actually made the links not work. So look for our newsletter, and the October registration will be on our Eventbrite starting next week, and the sessions start October 27th. So otherwise, have a great weekend. And once again, thanks, Krista. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Jen, for your tech support in the background. And I better go answer the phone. It's obviously important. Thanks again, everybody.
Bye.